Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. My name is Ahmed Moor and I'm a fellow at the Foundation. Today is November 26, 2025, and I'm very, very happy to be here with Naomi Klein, an award-winning journalist, columnist, and the international best-selling author of 9 books, including most recently Doppelganger, which I read and enjoyed and we'll talk about today. She's a columnist for The Guardian and contributor to Zeteo and the honorary professor of media and climate at Rutgers University, and is associate professor in geography at the University of British Columbia, where she's the founding co-director of UBC's Center for Climate Justice. Naomi, welcome.
Thank you. It's always good to have an excuse to talk with you.
You're so kind and you're also really generous with your time. You're one of the busiest people that I'm aware of, just based on scheduling. So thank you again. Um, I read your new essay entitled Surrealism Against Fascism. It just came out today. It's in Equator magazine, and we'll link to it. But I want to head right in with by reading a paragraph. So forgive me for talking over long. But fascism is roaring back in the 21st century, and in a sickening twist, it is rhetorically claiming that mass censorship, high-tech surveillance, and extrajudicial detention are necessary to protect the victims of 20th century fascism. Until, of course, even that flimsy facade is dropped in favor of purer white nationalism with no need for Jewish cover. That evolution is already well underway with unreconstructed anti-Semites on the far right, such as Nick Fuentes, helpfully amplified by Tucker Carlson, seizing upon widespread revulsion at Israel's carnage and the suppression of voices opposing it to open the floodgates of Jew hatred, updating the protocols of the Elders of Zion for the Jeffrey Epstein era. So there are about 9 condemnations in this paragraph.
Like, did we lose? Do we have anyone left who is still listening?
I
We definitely lost Candace Owen. That I know.
we left out. She's spinning off onto another planet now. But would you elaborate on Jewish cover here? I don't want to share my thoughts yet. What is Jewish cover in this context?
So I think, what I'm trying to get at specifically is the way in which claiming to be fighting anti-Semitism, which invariably just means fighting for Israel's right to commit genocide, at least in the past 2+ years, because it isn't really fighting against actual anti-Semitism, but the claim to be in solidarity with Jews against the threat of another Holocaust has been a way that fascist parties have reconstructed themselves in Europe. Um, we saw it immediately after October 7th, Marine Le Pen going to a march against anti-Semitism, which was actually a Stand with Israel march as it, unleashes genocidal violence. But I don't think we can underestimate the extent to which um, anti-Semitism was weaponized and instrumentalized by these forces to make themselves seem as if they were not who they are, which is actual, the people carrying the torch for Nazism in Europe and in the United States, people who, are part of the so-called American First Movement, which, has Nazi roots, that part of the American right. So they have been surging back, and they have used that claim, and now I think we're entering a new phase where having weaponized anti-Semitism in this way or instrumentalized it in this way, they no longer need it, right? And so now they can just drop it and sort of take the mask off and be like, actually, we are who we are. So I think we're going to see less of that. I think this was a phase, I suppose. I think it was a phase in Europe. I think it was a phase in North America. And now we're entering another phase.
But in thinking about triggers and thinking about who used whom, it's
Hmm.
kind of the worst people using one another.
Oh, for sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I
what,
mean, I
what's
think, and it's not an original insight that the support for Israel was, one ethno-nationalist project supporting another ethno-nationalist project. So it wasn't only using anti-Semitism in order to cleanse their image, although that was part of it. And that was the part of it that I was getting at in that quote you read.
right? And I mean, I guess that the point I was hoping to emphasize also is that in some ways the phenomenon has gotten out of hand for the pro-Israel parties that thought that they could manipulate the Christian right, the insurgent Christian right, I'd say, which has no use for Israel in regards to Jews as interlopers um, and as less than America first in the American context today. Um, do you agree with that, or do you think that that's maybe a bridge too far here?
Well, I think there's definitely, I think, if we're talking about the US, I think the coalition that Donald Trump held together through sheer force of his bizarre personality is fracturing and falling apart. And there are different fault lines. And one of them is support for Israel. And another is AI and support for oligarchs. I mean, there's lots of different forces that are creating this, the context for the rupture, and it's really about who's going to, inherit the torch from him, in 2028, assuming he's not running again, or maybe even if he runs again. Um, so, but that doesn't mean that, I guess, that the Christian Zionist movement in the United States is completely dead as part of the right-wing coalition. Yeah, I think it remains. I think we're talking in a moment of serious flux. But I but if I were to guess, if I were to predict which side will win, I think it's probably the quote unquote America First side, um, that is anti-Israel, not because it is particularly pro-Palestinian human rights, although they may sound like that on a given day. But I think they're instrumentalizing Palestinians in the same way that they instrumentalized Jews for a little while, or a long while, because it looks better. It looks better for Tucker Carlson to claim that he suddenly believes in universal rights for everyone, and he always has, and not that he isn't somebody who's fanned the flames of racism for a very long time and misogyny. Suddenly he's just, a universal humanitarianism, and that's what conservatism. I mean, come on, people are changing their tune nonstop, but I think it is useful right now. But I think precisely because the suppression of of a widespread horror, including on the right, at Israel's genocide has been so severe, the censorship has been so severe that there is, a lot of pent up um, energy for anyone who just says the most obvious truths, right? And so I think that that's what started to happen with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owen, and to a scarier extent, Nick Fuentes, or an even scarier. But yeah, if that makes sense.
It does, and so I
Still
mean,
trying to figure it out. I mean, it's very live.
it's true. I agree, and for me, this rupture is symbolized by Mike Huckabee on the one side and Tucker Carlson on the other, and um, we don't choose sides because, as you noted, neither one is really a sincere or humane human being. Um, but I kind of blame you for tuning me into all of this because before I read Doppelganger, I didn't know anything about the right wing
Mm,
blogosphere, Twitter, whatever it is. And then I opened it up and I started looking and I kind of fell down the rabbit hole. And these guys are intensely seductive. I mean, when
mm,
you've spent decades in the Palestine solidarity movement, kind of screaming into the wind,
yeah.
nobody's listening, you're locked out of mainstream media, and suddenly they begin to say things that sound more or less correct 98% of the time, and then they slip in a little bit of anti-Semitism. That's a really alluring and dangerous um, mirror, I suppose. And that's fundamentally the thesis of Doppelganger, isn't it? That the absence of truth-telling or the inability to have a conversation in the open results in conspiracies and conspiratorialism.
Yeah, that politics hates a vacuum. And so, I think people like Steve Bannon and Carlson, like a lot of these figures have really studied the failures on the left, including kind of cultural failures, like ways that we treat each other, and just sort of the kind of pile-on culture. I mean, which isn't to say that that doesn't exist on the right. It most certainly does. I mean, if you look at the way they treat one another, But understanding that there are people who that there are all these frustrations, and it creates these openings, and they're very skillful at exploiting them. And these are people who are magnificently good at the social media game, which is all about attention, which is all about being like the first out to say the kind of unsayable thing, which is going to suddenly get like a lot of traction. So that is who we've selected for. Those are the types that's who these platforms select for, I should say, not we, but this platform select for them.
And so how do you inoculate yourself against that? Where
Yeah, I mean,
are you rooted in it?
well, I'm just thinking about this latest from Tucker Carlson and saying, we like he was I mean, I think he's partly responding to the backlash that he received for platforming Nick Fuentes, when he was saying, that of course we believe in universal, that every individual has equal rights, or that that they're born with them, that they're inherent. And he was talking about saying very true things about Netanyahu, and the fact that he does not actually believe that Palestinians are humans, and have rights. And um, I mean, the truth is that I think that, and I mean, the reason why that creates such vertigo is that, I pretty much agree with him, and I think that we have often failed on the left to just kind of commit to some basic values about the value of human life, and even basic principles around freedom of speech, things like that. It's more about choosing our team. Like if somebody on our side, if it happens to someone on our side, it's the worst thing in the world. If we're doing it, it's completely justifiable, right? And so I think people see those types of hypocrisies, and they long for a kind of a roadmap of like, okay, what are the rules? Can we please follow the rules? And this is where, and I know our conversation is going to get there, but the fact that we are in this age where the imperfect, flawed attempts to codify some basic principles into international humanitarian law, of whether it's the rights of an individual, or the rights of a group, or the rules of war, or any of that, has been decimated. It's been decimated by Israel. It's been decimated by the United States, and so we're kind of like free falling without anything to catch us. We as a species, right? Um, and so I think in that context, when someone comes along and just says, well, how about if we just join this team, like the winning team, and then you just choose your team, as opposed to, I'm going to commit to this set of values even when it's uncomfortable, And that doesn't mean that I'm going to erase everything I know about power in the world. Um, and understand that not everybody is equal under these laws, under these principles, under these values, but that not having them is a lot worse and a lot more dangerous. Um, so, I think we've tended to just sort of look at the rank double standards and failures and evisceration of those principles by those in power, and sort of said, like, you see, like, it's all bullshit.
Mhm.
And as opposed to having more substantive conversations about how we strengthen them. Now, I think there are all kinds of conversations like that happening right now. If we look at the Hague Group, in the context of the UN, a group of countries who are like taking the Genocide Convention seriously and saying, let's commit to it. Let's really commit to it. Let's not conclude from this that the whole thing was a bad idea from the start, right? Um, and even in the context of climate change, we're seeing some of that kind of leadership from some of the same governments. After the climate talks just broke down, once again, Colombia has stepped up, to say, okay, well, we'll have a real climate convention that's willing to take on the fossil fuel industry, as opposed to just walking away and saying the whole thing is a sham. It certainly looks like a sham after 30 years, and they still can't say the words fossil fuel in a convention. That
Yeah.
so.
Well, so I mean, one of the things that comes across through your writing everywhere, you write like a realist. I mean, there's not a lot of, I don't read a lot of fantasy or any fantasies between the lines here about liberal internationalism, whatever it may be. You write with effervescence, and it seems like a real commitment to life, and you have a positive outlook, and it comes across in this latest essay. Um, but you also have a historical sense that things are piling into one another, and
Mm.
the pile of rubble is growing. And I think that's what you're getting at when you talk about not throwing out our institutions. But then I look at the United Nations. I mean, let me conflict that idea.
Yeah.
Annalena Baerbock, the former German, I think, foreign
Yeah.
minister, who is, in my from my perspective, it may be a big statement, but a war criminal. Uh,
Absolutely. It's fair.
right. And so this person is now posting today about the rights of women and girls after having
I mean,
spent
there's a fine tradition of that, to be fair,
yeah, right. But it's impossible for me
of
to
war criminals posting about the rights of women and girls. I mean,
right,
yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, I was going to make an off-color joke about Epstein, but I realized we're being recorded, so I'll stop.
Oh,
But in any case, so you look at the way in which the institutions, the secular institutions,
yeah.
um, I know you read Jewish Currents, Ariel, or read Jewish Currents, Ariel. Angel has a great essay when he knew Jewish institutions. But
Mm,
I'd extend the argument to secular, the U United Nations,
mhm.
the climate apparatus. So
Yeah.
how do you salvage a sense of hopefulness, a sense of energy around the new construction of institutions or the rejuvenation of institutions
Yeah.
when it's so evident that the people who are embedded within them today and probably tomorrow
Yeah.
are the actors who've helped lead us to where we are today?
I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not sure I'd say I'm an optimist about this, but I do think it is interesting, if we think about like what happens when somebody within one of these institutions decides to take their job very, very seriously, right? So if you look at what the impact that Francesca Albanese has had in her position, a volunteer position, a special envoy, this is kind of like it's sort of like these roles mean as much or as little as the person in it decides to make it mean. Um, and but the power that they have is the power of the title and the institution behind them, right? And the rules that they're able to invoke. And if we think about the report that she and her team published about the economy of genocide, and as it relates to international law, it's an extraordinarily powerful document, and I think a dangerous document in this. And the fact that the U.S. imposed sanctions on her, I think the day or the day after it published, shows that many of the companies that are named in it know that they have been violating international law. And I think that their response to that, if we're thinking about institutions like Palantir, or, other big tech companies, or like, I think we are so deep into the age of impunity here, and just open, just the most brazen violations of international law. Yes, Israel is the quintessential example of that. But if you look at what the United States is doing in the Caribbean right now, just sort of turning it into a free fire zone, and all of the legal experts screaming that this is, a war crime, and then just continuing um, over and over again. I think the implications of that are that you kind of have to take down the whole institution with you, or else it will hold you responsible. I mean, this is what is so scary about having all of these criminals at the helm. And here, I'm talking about war criminals, but I'm also just talking about, the corruption, of a Netanyahu, and now Trump taking it into the stratosphere, where basically the U.S. government is a sort of a crypto scam disguised as a government, and the whole, and just using his family's cryptocurrency company as a way for whoever wants to, buy his favor to do so in total obscurity. So what are the implications of that? Like that really can't coexist. There was a speech that Steve Bannon gave a few weeks ago where he said, we have to win the midterms or 80% of us will be in jail. That's scary that they know that, right? So I do, I guess I take some hope from the fact that they're afraid. Like they're afraid of Francesca Albanese. They're afraid of these laws, and which is why they're going after these institutions, which is why they don't want there to be an international criminal court or a court of justice. And so I guess those of us who oppose them and oppose their actions have to think about what our relationship is to these institutions, because theirs is very clear. They don't want them to exist, right? Because because even this shadow of an existence creates enough of a threat to them that they don't want it there. So, I think we should be trying to actualize their threats, whatever that means. But I do think that Francesca Albanese shows us a little bit about what that might mean. And I do think that these kind of breakaway coalitions of the willing, the Hague Group, or this new climate coalition of 55 countries that want to talk about a phase out of fossil fuels while the rest of the UN climate countries that are signatories to the UN Climate Convention could not agree to say the words fossil fuels, oil, gas, or coal in their final agreement, right? Um,
Mhm.
so, I've been to a lot of these summits and I stopped going because they're so frustrating, but I would consider being part of a process, that is based on the premise of like, let's go just figure out whether we can do this and, and keep, the architecture alive, right? Instead of following this race to the bottom. But what you're saying about the UN, I guess, I would like to hear more from you about what you think about it. What our relationship should be to an institution that has, except for a couple of bright lights, failed egregiously in the face of its most important role, which is stopping a genocide.
Perfectly right, and not only failed egregiously, but is being manipulated and used now in a way that is legitimate based on how it was designed in order to
Yes.
rubber stamp that genocide, in order to sign off on its consummation and now the partition and ongoing ethnic cleansing of Gaza has been sanctioned by the UN Security Council, not through sleight of hand, not because anybody did anything they shouldn't have, but because the United States put its pressure where it could and exerted enough such that everybody else fell into line, which is how the
Yeah.
institution is designed. It worked the
Mhm.
way it was supposed to. And so the imprimatur,
Yeah.
the whole idea of international law as such, um, when it can be so easily manipulated, when things that are so obviously unjust can be enshrined through the expression of raw power, you begin to question whether the institution itself is serving things like justice, lofty goals that I want to believe in and want to continue to work towards. But then it's a
Yeah.
question of whether the institution can functionally serve those. So where do we go from here? I think I first of all I don't know, but I think if I
Mhm.
was leading a country like Venezuela or Nicaragua or Egypt, I would think about how the naked power, the raw power mechanism, which is at work well, what the implications are for me. And I would think about creating alternative institutions, not because I believe in human rights, or not because I believe that, but in order to protect me and to protect
Mhm.
my rent and a little bit of extraction that I can go for in my little country. And that's a kind of a sad vision of
Mhm.
how the world develops. But
Right.
it seems now that we've ushered in this era of lawlessness. It's always been there, right?
Right. Right.
It's been codified and invested in by everybody. And you saw that with Trump's parade in Egypt. He gathered all of these world leaders, and and then pronounced, and I loved it. He said, "I'm the only one here who matters," and it was
What? I
perfect.
missed that.
I'll send it to you. It's worth watching,
Wow.
but it,
Verbalizing his inner monologue. Nice.
but it's hard to see how we end up, in a place that doesn't again attempt to recreate the international system away from the United States, but by counterbalancing the United States. And that's not a human rights centered world.
Yeah. Yeah. And another way of thinking about the moment that we're in is that you said it was designed to fail. Exactly right. There was always a tension between these lofty goals of universal rights and principles and conventions and the structure of the UN. And there were all of these kind of get out of jail free cards that were built in, right? Whether it was the Security Council and the veto, or whether it was Israel itself, right? Like, I mean, for 1948 is like it's the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and it's the creation of the State of Israel that violates it, right?
Mhm.
Um, so so it's we are in this moment where all of the exceptions have swallowed the whole, right? The exceptions have become the rule. And that's the problem with exceptions. And that's why committing to universal applications, even when it sucks, is I think worth doing in,
Mhm.
you know, how we choose to build in this rubble.
And I'm grateful for that message. I don't want to be mired in the muck of pessimism and a black outlook forever. So I appreciate that. And so it sounds like you're saying that investing in institutions which are oriented around the law, a law that we believe is just, is worth doing because we can make the most of those institutions when we're in positions of power. But there's a second piece, which is accountability, right? Like,
Canva, yeah.
and we haven't talked about that, but Dick Cheney died recently.
I
Uh,
mean, before we go on to Dick Cheney, I do just want to say that it is about law, but I'm not a lawyer, you know? I mean, I think it's about like I would use the word values too. Like I think it's about I think the laws flow from who we want to be, like what our essential values are, what our ethics are, right? And they were born out of carnage and wreckage, and then they were codified. But like, I don't want to just have it take a legalistic view because I think that there's a there's something deeper there.
and I appreciate that amendment because I'm not a lawyer either, and that is where I live. The idea
Yeah,
that, right. So really a values orientation in our institutions. But then accountability. Dick Cheney dies. I'm not going to celebrate anybody's death, but it was time for Dick Cheney to die. And the entire liberal American apparatus shows up. Rachel Maddow is there. Kamala Harris is there. The Obamas probably had a podcast to tape. Nothing against podcasts. They weren't there.
okay, they weren't there. Interesting.
But the absence of accountability in public life, and I'm taking an American-centric perspective, you could really
Yeah,
apply it anywhere. The global financial system fails. Nobody's held accountable. So how do we begin to develop a new orientation around accountability? What does that look like? And I'm not
mm,
talking about institutions here. I'm,
yeah,
I'm, I'm leading to another part of our conversation.
okay. Um, I mean, I don't think that I think accountability is about power, unfortunately, right? Because it is the kind of you and what army um, that is being asked of the world, right? And and so and this brings us back to what we were talking about before, like what is the point of having these universal values encoded is so that it isn't just about might makes right and whoever has the most nukes gets to do whatever they want. And but that display at Dick Cheney's funeral, I mean, it's a familiar one. We've seen it again and again, and it is liberals. It's not like it's not leftists, and I think that fascism and liberalism have are flip sides of the same coin, and one produces the other. Or like I teach a course on fascism, and it's called the long arc of fascism, and so it's looking at the continuities between colonialism and what was called capital F fascism in Europe, in between the two, after the First World War, and what we're seeing today, which I've called end times fascism, because of its sort of apocalyptic lack of a future horizon when it comes to the tech oligarchs beyond like going to Mars or going into their bunkers, or the religious apocalypticism of a Ben Gvir, or a Mike Huckabee, and that alliance. I don't think it represents everybody who votes for Trump, but I think there's some very powerful people who are in the grips of an apocalyptic vision of the world. They want things to burn. They want things to go down, which is another reason why we have to, commit to each other and to this place and to this realm. Because it's sort of, I think that particular way of being in the world is as it is a sort of a very linear story, and it's reaching its, apocalyptic conclusion in all kinds of ways. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think we have to stand up to them. I think we have to build power. I think we need to have to be in messy coalition with each other. That is not going to be guided by the maximalist, most purist positions, or defining themselves as the purist positions. I think we have to figure out how to build power. Um, Dick Cheney died on the same day Zohran Mamdani became mayor of New York City. I think it was the same day. This is why I kind of like tuned out a lot a lot of the Dick Cheney news. That's a kind of justice. It's not accountability, but it's kind of justice that he got upstaged by Zoran winning the election. Um,
I
but
hadn't thought of that, and I agree. Yes.
it's something. It's something. Yeah. What's on
So
your
could you
mind
trace
about
that?
that?
Well, I again I go back to grassroots, the way in which we either organize for accountability or we don't, but the institutions themselves aren't organized that way.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
Um,
think it's urgent that we do, and this is something that I did get into, in Doppelganger about how the conspiracy culture that has really um, taken such deep root on the right, with stuff around that, we saw it very dramatically around QAnon, but QAnon has morphed into Jeffrey Epstein, has morphed, and there are all these stories that have this kind of narrative arc of like, if we just get X, if we just Q is going to do the thing, or we're going to get the files and we're going to really see all the criminality, and then there'll be a great storm. That's the Q language, but it's sort of like there's going to be something's going to happen. It's just going to, they're all going to go to jail, like, and it's this kind of fairy tale version of what justice would look like, but it's born of this rampant criminality and the fact that a Dick Cheney can, have that, wonderful send off. Um, and it will be impolite to mention that he is a war criminal, and ushered in the era of corruption that we're seeing right now. That Trump is able to do with Bitcoin. I mean, I've always said when people talked about how corrupt the first Trump administration was, it's like, yeah, but like Ivanka's handbags versus Halliburton, like, like that's like, call me when there's a $10 billion no bid contract. And okay, now Palantir has one. So like, but still, it took a while to catch up to Dick Cheney on that front.
That's right. But as you're talking about QAnon and their irrationality, I'm thinking, wait a second. The Epstein Black Book, like these guys kind of had it right on at least in one dimension.
Listen, there's always got to be some truth for it to work, right? But the point is that I think we're being called upon to have an actual credible vision of justice that is not like built on a comic book, about what's going to happen when you get Epstein's Black Book and then everybody's going to get sent to jail all at once. But it is pointing us towards, if we want to kind of have a glass half full sort of vision of it, is like people want justice. They're pissed. They know they're being screwed over by a bipartisan coalition of elites. But the thing um, about anti-Semitism and the kind of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion kind of brand of it is that it is a doppelganger of real justice, right? It's like this idea that there is a room somewhere where they're all plotting, and if we could just find the room and we could just find the proof, we could lock them all up, and then we could have capitalism, the good kind, right? Then we could have, and so this is, conspiracy culture is how capitalism cleanses itself, right? In these moments when when it is threatened with a popular uprising against, um, you know, like just way too much wealth hoovering up to the top and the kind of criminality that we've been talking about. It's in those moments when people are really ready to explode and ready to have socialism, that you have, this like this doppelganger of justice, which is, no, it's not a system. It's just those guys. If we could just get those guys, then we can protect the system. So I
And it
do
leads
think,
to a
yeah,
lynch mob.
yeah, and it doesn't change the system. It
Right.
is a system protecting. mechanism. So
Right.
even though it might feel good, I mean, this is where I think, bringing us back to what it feels like to, hear a Tucker Carlson, say some of the things that, needed to be said. I think we have to take a step back and understand what is happening.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. And so you talk about capitalism and fascism in the same breath, and liberalism, and these are
yeah.
they're deeply related and interconnected. But could you just explicate and draw out the connections more concretely? Um,
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was talking about my course and I didn't finish that thought, but
mhm,
the way I explain fascism in that course is that it's capitalism's worst mood
mhm,
in the sense that it's not to say that capitalism is always fascist, although there are always some people who are experiencing pretty much every definition of what we might, like is on the kind of checklist. There are always going to be an out group. There's always going to be people who are sort of outside the laws, who are subject to thug violence, whatever your fascism checklist is. But that's not the same as a whole society, right? It's kind of flipping over into those mechanisms and, losing any accountability or opposition voices so I don't want to say that it's all the same, but I do think that it is a mood. It is one of the things that the system does to protect itself. And I think that well, moments when it tends to surge are moments of real crisis for capitalism and real credible threats of a redistributive response to that crisis, right? So if we
right.
think
So
about the
crisis.
1930s, yeah. So we think about the 1920s and 30s, right? Like Mussolini comes to power in 22, and that begins the sort of fascist takeover of Europe, right? So this is the aftermath of the First World War, which was, you know, an insane war that maimed a generation and pounded cities to rubble um, and there is a backlash and there's a feeling of abandonment and there's feelings of betrayal, particularly as we know in Italy and in Germany, feelings of humiliation. And then it's compounded by the market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression. Um, but what we can never forget is that there's also the Russian Revolution, yeah, and the credible threat of a socialist revolution in every European country, including in Germany, right? So fascism is the system's way of saying, yes, this system is corrupt. Yes, we must cleanse it. But the real enemies, and it always starts by going after the communists, right? And
Mhm.
this is, this part of the history of Nazism is, even though, oh yeah, okay, mention the communists, but you don't like the centrality of the fact that they were cleansing, the fact that Jews got equated with Bolshevism, right? That was this idea of cleansing capitalism from this sort of polluted element within it. And then you get so good capitalism again, like that's the end of that story. So I think that we are in a perilous moment right now because the system is failing so many people.
Mhm.
There is this sense of like we're coming. That's why I think we're seeing such a surge of apocalypticism and messianic thought because there's this feeling afoot that something is breaking and it's not wrong, right? Once again, there's always truth in it. Whether we're thinking about it ecologically or we're thinking about it financially and all the people that this economic system isn't working for. Um, and I think from the perspective of the oligarch class, they're worried. They're worried about popular backlash and, you know, it's hard. Like I struggle with this because as somebody who's been on the left my whole life, we always feel like we're losing, like we always feel like so weak, right? Um, but if you eavesdrop for a little while on Peter Thiel or, Mark Andreessen or, whoever it is, their experience is, okay, workers are organizing at these big tech companies. They're making all kinds of demands. They're telling them not to take contracts they want to take. They pay attention to climate science. They look at somebody like Greta Thunberg and, they look at the climate movement. I mean, there's a reason Peter Thiel is trying to convince people Greta Thunberg is the Antichrist, because they sort of understand that their business model can't really coexist with a habitable planet, which is why they're building bunker. I know now I'm starting to sound like I've got my own blackboard with all the things, but like,
But it's
um,
right. It's the other side of it, right? I mean, it's not just about redistribution, it's also about profit-seeking behavior. It's not just the peasants are coming with their pitchforks in order to take what I've got. It's how do I create bigger markets? And this is where the
right.
weapons industry comes in, the surveillance industry.
Absolutely.
For
And AI. I
perpetuity.
mean, I think that these are industries that really, I think there's something about where the money is right now. Like if you look at where, all of the growth in the stock market right now is because of the AI boom. In
Mhm.
my opinion, AI is a criminal industry. You know, yes, I mean, it's absolutely embedded in the military, in the infrastructure of genocide
Mhm.
um, in Gaza.
The
Um,
welfare system specifically.
yes. But even if we're thinking about, a company like, OpenAI or Anthropic, I mean, Anthropic stole 9 of my books. I mean, there's a lawsuit. I can type my name into their website, and it's just like, yeah, we trained our models on 9 of your books.
Mhm.
So it's really just, my co-author Astra Taylor calls it theft tech. Molly Crabapple was like the first visual artist I knew who had all her entire artistic style stolen by these machines, right? So they really do know that it violates copyright, and the courts have said it, and so on. But they're just trying to outrun the law because they're making trillions of dollars. I mean, Elon Musk is going to be the world's first trillionaire because of this,
Mhm.
or in part because of it. So, you know, I think they're
And
addicted.
upending our system of legal understanding around what you own when you create something. I mean, they're
Exactly.
literally rewriting the rules that society is governed by.
And the end game is the first company that wins and reaches, what they call artificial general intelligence or super intelligence. All that means is that they figured out how to replace, they've defined it. I think OpenAI has defined it as, the point by which the AI can perform 60% or more of all human economic activity. Do you know how many jobs that is, right? So, people's water, like, I mean, it is consuming so much fossil fuel energy that the International Energy Agency has had to recalibrate their climate predictions because the US is building data centers so quickly. And thanks to Donald Trump, making sure that they're hooked up to fossil fuels instead of renewables. So it really is kind of a wild stage that capitalism is in terms of what it is willing to sacrifice in order to build a technology that will wage war on all of our livelihoods. Like,
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
kind of bargain is this? You think about the industrial bargain, and it was like, we'll build a factory, we'll pollute your river, but we'll give you 3,000 jobs, right?
Well, to bring it full circle, Tucker Carlson's a prepper, and maybe you and I should be too.
I think we need collective prepping. This is what me and Astor are looking at right now. It's like we need to prep, but we need collective prepping,
Yeah.
not just not just for our own bubble. But yeah, so I think that it's really only fascism that can protect this business model, and that
That's
is
right.
why we're seeing such a jarring, um, kind
That's
of.
right. So it's the accumulation of wealth, the commodification of you and me, and the destruction of the environment. Really,
Okay, let's talk
which
about something fun. I mean,
yeah, right. Electoral politics,
yeah.
because
Mm.
you end your essay in Equator on a positive note, and it's really Zoran Mamdani, an extraordinary person, mobilized so many people. I'm hopeful he'll achieve a tenth of his agenda um, with people of good faith in New York. What about everybody who is dying now? The people for whom electoral politics is a slow train and they needed to be there yesterday. And,
Yeah.
and I'm talking about the genocide in Palestine as well. The ethnic cleansing of Gaza and of the West Bank, I think is a done deal. I think the conditions of life have been rendered, or life has been rendered unlivable based on the prevailing conditions in those places today. And by design, with intention, people are going to get up and leave to the extent they can, or they're just going to die in place. Where does organizing electorally or organizing even BDS, where does that get us when
Mm.
the urgency is so profound, is so total?
Wow. Wow. I mean, I wish I had an answer to that question. And I don't think I've certainly never believed that electoral politics on its own was going to deliver anything, and I think Mamdani's electoral victory was a movement victory, and that would not have happened without the DSA and so many base building organizations that were on the ground. Um, the miracle of that campaign with 100,000 volunteers. I mean, like I went to New York for a couple days around the election, and I spoke at a couple of canvases at a couple of rallies. And I live in Canada, and I mentioned that like that's bigger than our standing army. So like his volunteer army is bigger than our standing army.
Yes.
Um, so um, so, I think I take heart from the fact that, immediately after the election, an email went out to all the volunteers that people are staying mobilized, and that this just part of the work is having people, in power, the organizing, the grassroots organizing, the community organizing to make the promises possible, is ongoing, and it has to have some distance from the electoral project. Um, I also feel like some of what we're seeing on the right um, is pointing to the fact that opposition to this genocide, opposition to U.S. support for Israel, um, material support for Israel, diplomatic support for Israel, military support for Israel, especially. Um, does not have majority support. And there's never been like a movement configuration that could capture that majority, right? So whatever the answer is, I think some of it is there, right? Some of it is like, how is that possible? And I do think that Zoran did show some of that, like some of the organizing model showed how to capture a majority that is sort of latent but unorganized, right? So maybe there's something there, and that doesn't, that does nothing in the near term for people in Gaza who don't have food, and whose tents are filled with rainwater and sewage, and you know um, but I don't think that there's, like, if the answer is building power and building the broadest possible coalition, I don't know what is. And I think that why I ended the piece with Mamdani in that moment is not because I think he is, God, like, who's our Messiah, although maybe he is, but I mean, we can return to that another time. But but no, because he showed us what that would look like. There was this moment coming out of the victory party, and there was this lineup of people outside the theater who they looked like the people who wait outside, like a film festival trying to catch a glimpse of celebrities, but they didn't know who they were waiting for. Like, it was just like they were just waiting for each other. Like, they were all the celebrity. There was no celebrity. And just like anyone who walked out, they just cheered. They're like, yes.
And then there's Naomi Klein, so let's share it too.
No idea who I was. But it was just like,
Um,
yeah, everyone's a celebrity. It was just such a great moment. Yeah.
so my final question to you, because I know that you have to go.
Yeah.
Coalitions, who's in, who's out, who can be in the coalition? And it's okay
Well,
to keep it
yeah,
brief, but
yeah.
it's clearly not Tucker and Fuentes, right? So, but is there a right coalition here?
I think there's a lot of people who, maybe some of the people who listen to Tucker, and if Tucker actually means it, about that universal worth, and he's had a change of heart, um, great.
Mhm.
Um, but this is where I think that those values, like committing to those values really matter because there are organizing principles as well, right? They are how we know who our comrades are, right?
Mm.
And I don't think the bar, I don't think I think whenever we set the bar too high, we end up with a really small movement. But you know, I've always kind of been inclined to reject the idea that just valuing human life like is a low bar because we live in a time where, you know, mass death is being normalized on every single front. Um, and so actually committing to some of these normie liberal principles is pretty radical. And the liberals don't believe in them. So I
Mm.
think we should sort of disentangle like what we're calling liberal and what is not, like really valuing, you know, human life equally wherever on the planet people live. It would change everything on this planet. Absolutely everything.
I'm encouraged by that answer and hope to live by your and others' example. Commit to values, um, and then kind of ignore everything else. I'm so grateful to you, Naomi Klein, for making time for this conversation.
I'm beyond grateful for you. And you already live by those values and principles. And I'm so grateful to you. Thank you.